Thank you, Johnny. And thanks to Gareth and Candy particularly, and to the network for inviting us to talk about our report. I say report as opposed to research. It's not academic research. We've just gathered a lot of views and reviewed. Hang on, how do I move slide? There we go. Okay. So we gathered lots of views, evaluated all the research out there, academic, commercial, and we're also doing some research in partnership with Full Fact. If you don't know about Full Fact, they're a charity that look to promote accuracy in public debate. And sadly, that isn't anywhere near ready, but we're trying to survey central government departments on their research and policy departments' approach to social media and what value they place in it as a research tool. So my job essentially was to write a 10-page, roughly short report that anyone in the public sector could pick up and make sense of what this phenomenon called social media could mean to them beyond a communication or engagement tool. So some of what I'll talk about will be pretty basic for you guys, but hopefully it will shed some light on some of the wider issues, looking at the issue in the round that will come up eventually if social media becomes developed and becomes adopted as a kind of proper social research tool. And the report itself, hopefully, if I pull my finger out, will be ready in about the next 6 to 8 weeks. We're possibly launching an event, but we will keep the network informed about all that, and hopefully you guys will be involved. But yeah, my final word before I sort of get stuck in is I'd really like any feedback from you guys about where I'm going wrong or what I've missed on this. So there you go. Okay, so that's the exam question that we're trying to answer. Can the public sector really benefit from the kind of evidence that social media can generate? And then background context, government and governance in the 21st century, a significant level of social, economic, political activity is all happening on the internet. We're still at a very early stage of social media adoption. Most people are still trying to grasp how to use it as a communication, marketing, or engagement tool. So I think when we emerge from that phase, that things will become more interesting. Social media networks are small but very highly visible in the sense that there's an incredible amount of hype and an incredible amount of chat about big data. And social media is just one very small aspect to it, but it is sort of the highest thing on the kind of public horizon around the big data debate. Some numbers I took from a technology analyst about the investment, and I mentioned this earlier when Carl was talking about the commercial sector and the kind of ethical issues. The level of investment that's going into analytics and big data kind of exploration and mining is huge. 50 billion, growing at 16% a year. So as I hinted earlier on the ethical stuff, there is a lot at risk here for the private sector. It's not just a kind of take it or leave it. Anyway, I'll come some more on that. And partly because of the hype, and partly because it's a new medium. Some analysts pointed out that a lot of the private sector investment in social media has, lacked a really clear, robust business case. It's been very high profile and it's very exciting, but what has come as a result of this investment is open to question. So there's a bit of context, kind of background of where we started this from. And these two quotes, and I've taken various quotes from the report, and I haven't got to the stage where I've kind of got approval from the people who said these things. So some of them are attributed, some of them not. And the first quote, I thought these two quotes together kind of express the juxtaposition or the dilemma for government. I mean, basically, social media isn't going to go away. I think we all accept that. And there is a flow of information and insight coming from it that the government is obliged to engage with and understand as a government in a representative democracy at the very least. And then someone who's very much involved in technology said the bottom quote, which is, the hype is, it's almost impossible to sort of see through it at this point. There's just everyone is talking data and the potential of data, and it's in this kind of evangelical way. So it's hard to see clearly. So anyway, so the potential's there, and also the kind of blurring of what it all means. So hence the need for a report that will shed some light on these things. So these are the kind of top based around the kind of interviews I had with the 25 or so experts. And sorry, I meant to mention the experts I spoke to were social media analysts, technology analysts, technology consultants, think tanks, technology consultants, academics, people from the UN, also people across the sphere who I felt would have some strong thinking on what this could mean. So these are some of the top line opportunities for government. The reduction in the democratic deficit, to lots of people I spoke to, was a really exciting, people who are involved in the front line of technology development in central government were really genuinely excited about the opportunity that a feed of insight from the population could mean for those that govern us. Early warning indicators, which is quite well explored, particularly in health. CDC in the States has a huge social media program aimed at identifying pandemics, etc. Behavioral insights into social problems, I'll touch upon this later, but some really honest kind of insights were possible, particularly in the health sector. Knowledge sharing, again, this isn't sort of using social media as a primary evidence tool, but just as a mere tool for knowledge sharing, could significantly reduce demand on providing information and services to public service users. And again, I will have some case studies in the report that should illustrate that very well, but unfortunately not ready to go today. Operational improvements to public service delivery, again, this has been quite well mirrored in the private sector. You can identify problems in the services you're providing to your users, citizens, whatever, and a more sort of process-driven, technology-based transaction process with citizens. And I think lastly, the final point, I mean, I think this is already happening to a large extent. I spoke to several people, EU bodies, central government departments, who are honing their messaging when they're trying to create a shift in public policy from insights from social media, social networks. So that last point, I think, is fairly well advanced. So three of the most compelling arguments I heard for why the insight generation from social media, the real-time nature of it, contrast if you could get some effective behavioral indicators, social indicators with real integrity. I mean, contrast that with using data from the census. Again, the sincerity aspect that I just mentioned, the examples I came across, which I wasn't allowed to speak about because they're not in the public domain, were specifically in two areas of health, mental and physical health, where people in forums and chat rooms and so on were just much more open and spoke sincerely amongst themselves about their problems and how to tackle them. So I found that a very compelling argument. Cost, I was unable to find some really good numbers on the cost to government of social science research, but there's obviously a significant, I'm not going to attempt to put a number on it, potential for a cost saving there. And this is another unattributed quote. So the groundswell of movement, I mean, as we saw with the US election, there was a hell of a lot of targeting of swing states through insights based on social media, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of. But 2010, the last election, just the kind of movement on social media, we hadn't got to that point. So we can expect 2015 to be very interesting. I believe Demos are holding an event this evening looking at this and looking particularly at Beppe Grillo, the Italian stand-up comedian. He got 25% of the vote, just completely eschewing conventional media techniques, and that's not necessarily why he got the votes, but anyway, so there's going to be a hell of a lot of interest in campaigning and social media, and we can already see that at think tank level and party level, as this person said, but it is coming to government. So Carl kindly is here in the audience, but I thought I'd get him to speak through this slide. So this, I thought he put this really well. And just to sum up where the challenge lies for government and social scientists generally in producing useful insights. A lot of the noise, a lot of the excitement is coming from the kind of communications industry, as I'm sure you're all aware. And the standards, the rigor required just isn't up to scratch as yet, which I assume is where you guys come into the equation, and you're trying to change that. And again, I did some work on private sector use of data and making data-led decisions, and there's a lot more to this debate, which I'll touch upon later, rather than just getting the technology right and getting the approach right. So yeah, just trying to break it down into 3 buckets, and in bold the third point, because that's what I'm primarily interested in. I don't want to write a paper on collaboration or consultations, crowdsourcing and so on. Although interesting and valid, the report will look very much at how to use it as a primary research tool. And I think you probably guessed he said the quote at the bottom. So I found when I started this project, and as I've pointed out, several people I've spoken to earlier, I didn't find social media a particularly easy thing to get my head around. I found just conceptually, and the language we use around it is just really not very helpful. I mean, we don't have conversations about the news generally, and it's a new thing, and the language will get more granular. So I thought talking about social networks in a research sense, or social media, just isn't very helpful. It's much better to break these things down and look very specifically at the kind of question you're trying to answer and where the insight could come from, rather than the starting point of social media, which may be a very obvious point to you guys, but I thought would be quite useful for others who haven't thought about this. And these were some other points. Again, I'm a non-researcher talking to a bunch of academic researchers, but these points I thought were particularly useful as I struggle to understand it. You know, we've had years and years of working with all sorts of the more traditional research methods, and we've honed them down very well. Insights from social media, again, so many people said, you know, it's only really going to be useful when you start matching it with other data to act as a means to cross-reference, to corroborate, and to sort of use as a backup. And if you're talking about social media and any kind of digital insight drawn from anything digital, inevitably you get drawn into the world of big data, which I know is being talked about and overhyped considerably at the moment, but it's inevitable that you get sucked into that, because that's when it becomes exciting and easy to manage large data sets when combined with other forms of digital-based insight. Okay, and Carl, once again, you get another big quote here. It's a very long one, but again, I thought he put it really well about the need for a new epistemology to underpin a methodology that will make evidence robust enough to use. And there is a huge challenge in this, but from all the people I spoke to, I didn't really get any sense of, I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this one off. It's going to take time, it's going to be incremental, but it can be done. Okay, I assume everyone's had time to read that. So these were the key kind of challenges that I identified, and again, if any of you want to point out what I've omitted or make any comments on, these are the kind of key challenges to developing a methodology, and I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more complexity that I could go into, but the basic points, the underlying data from who's saying what, where, and when isn't something that you're going to immediately have access to because it doesn't belong to us, and we can see what's being said. Establishing information about the sample is challenging, but as I'm sure you were all aware of the news story about that Cambridge Microsoft research a couple of weeks ago, you're just using Facebook likes. I don't see why we can't surmount that problem on having a better understanding of demographics. And then finally, obviously the big one, the on-offline bias, how to correctly weight data for a kind of, in some sectors of the population, very vociferously active squeaky wheels, as some people put it, the vocal minority, which again is just a typical problem of representation, which I don't see any reason why we can't figure that one out, although obviously complex. So some other challenges that I thought would be pertinent to a government policymaker, the flexibility of the kind of framework you're going to need. We can't try and manage social media. It's a very grassroots, naturally evolving thing. So if and when the government decides to go down this road in a big way, you're going to need to develop a framework that allows for that kind of changing nature of social media. Again, it would be fascinating to see if I was making this kind of presentation in 5 years' time, what social media is going to look like. And again, no one's going to hazard a guess on what it would look like. So second point, adoption of data-driven insights. As any technology consultant will tell you, it's all very well adopting a new technology, but if the culture of your organization and the processes and its decision-making kind of hierarchy aren't willing to adopt data-driven insights, then you've just spent rather a lot of money. And this is particularly true of the civil service, where you get that difficulty of the anonymous civil servant, and then social media requires this kind of blurring of the personal and professional, as somebody pointed out to me. So again, the culture, the closeness of the civil service and the public sector, and the kind of risk-averse approach to technology and openness. And as one journalist pointed out to me, openness only lasts for the first couple of years in office, and then that process is reversed. But I think social media has helped to steadily chip away at that kind of government cycle of believing in openness and then finding it rather difficult. Okay, so moving on. So this was someone who involved in the social media analysis world in the private sector. And his view was that there is really strong demand, growing very rapidly for qualitative and quantitative research for central government departments and local government as well, just to try and understand the views of those users. And his view was that at the moment it's looking at what people say to get various messaging right and to try and understand problems and so on. But there will very soon be attempts by public bodies to really to get into those conversations and influence them, which presents a whole other ethical dimension. Okay, risk. So I've tried to break down my presentation to opportunity, challenge, and risk as a kind of simple way of thinking about it. So Carl raised this earlier, and it came up in the original presentation. And this was something that I think virtually everybody I spoke to, and as I tried to point out, there is awareness of the potential for a backlash in the private sector, and as I said, putting at risk huge amount of investment that's going into big data and analytics and so on. So it's very much a mainstream activity. I don't have any evidence to and I'm sure someone's done it, to I think someone touched upon this earlier, to explain the extent to which the average citizen is really thinking about how their data is being used. But as Candy pointed out, it's going to have to take something to go badly wrong before the kind of before it's exposed. And one of my recommendations that we'll come to in the end is, a more upfront approach, and particularly working with kind of privacy groups. Would that be a better way forward? And then trying to actually develop a proper regulatory response to the latest developments. Someone in a social media consultancy pointed out, if you're going to, say, look at a particular conversation of a group of people who have a particular health problem, you need to ensure that the purpose of your research is in the interest of that community. And this was in the FT a couple, 6 days ago. I don't know if you clocked it, but a company called Axiacom, which is a £1.4 billion company that has, and this is the copy from ZDNet on the same story. They have, as you can see from that, 7,000 clients, 40% of the Fortune 100, is that the right word? Yeah, Fortune 100 use them, and they have 700 million files on different consumers in the West, I assume, and a lot of that will be drawn from social media activity. And they have, they're going to open up their files, so you as an individual can go and see what they hold on you. So I think that's quite a clear indication, and as you'll note from the final point in the article, that is a government starting to look into this and trying to encourage more transparency. And I think we'll see more of that in the nearish future as the private sector, and inevitably this is going to rise up the public agenda. I can't see how it won't, and it seems highly newsworthy to me. And again, someone else, a technology analyst, talking about how similarly to those sort of health examples in the health sector forums that I was talking about, it's when the most useful data out there, beyond a lot of the noise, is when you really go in deep and look at the kind of qualitative aspects to the insights available. And as this person advocates, it would be much better to have an open, upfront, as I said before, conversation with the general public rather than just going, right, this is what's happening. You know, this is something that we've all got a stake in. And I think that's a very valid point. And this was someone else who started my conversation with this point. You know, there are plenty of people out there, didn't want to name any of them, but who really probably do understand how to really get people's thinking out of social media and how to use it. And I put down the dark side slightly in jest. You know, this does sound like something out of an Orwellian kind of film plot, but there really was concern about a lot of people I spoke to that once, if and when this does get up and running, i.e. some proper social insight from social media, if and when the wrong kind of administration gets in power, that this could be a very dangerous thing. So that may sound slightly sci-fi, but I think it is something to be concerned about. Trust, I put down as, again, I touched on this earlier about the idea of sort of technology-based transactional processes. Will they inspire more trust, or because there aren't so many opportunities for human error, or will it actually do the opposite because it's a kind of mechanized machine and we can't see what's going on behind it? And then loss of authority, which I thought was a really fascinating issue. If the government goes down the route of encouraging social media engagement and encouraging information sharing amongst the public, its kind of role as the owner of insight into the whole world of public services and all the knowledge that goes with that will be lost to some extent. And when the government wants to put across a message, as certain governments in the Middle East have found, that will, you know, it just gets smashed by the power of social media and the power of people to question that authority. So there's three other risk aspects that I thought were worth touching upon, and of course my report will go into this in a bit more detail. The other, digital exclusion, which I assume many of you are very aware of, that skills and access to this stuff, access to social media and use of social media is almost symmetrical with the kind of social exclusion, the lower social groups. Some don't even use social media at all. And that is changing, and I spoke to people in America who said the kind of data plans you can get now for pay-as-you-go phones have actually had a huge impact on this. So that's something that the government absolutely needs to be aware of and compensate for. And then again, the issue of representation and not really being able to put your finger on an algorithm and the kind of dark aspects of technology, I will inevitably produce some problems for government. I hope that made sense. So, conclusions. And I thought after I'd written that yesterday, the first bullet point, that you could probably say that about travelling about the speed of light. It's not a particularly helpful kind of conclusion, and I don't think my report is going to come up with some very black and white yes, no answers to that question. Rather, it's going to be if you go down this road and you do this and you do that, you will be able to see clearly. But until that happens, it's not really a very easy question to answer, which I know may not be the best outcome, but there's a lot of ifs and buts to get through, basically. There are major ethical questions that need to be tackled now, and I think these aren't if government goes down the route of using social media as a source of insight. I mean, that's already happening to some extent, but if it goes down it in a major way, I think these, as was touched upon earlier, these issues are big, rising, and going to get bigger, and need to be tackled. And the technology players, which I thought was another interesting point, Google, Facebook and Twitter, are in effect now actors in the public policy arena. They're setting the kind of parameters for participation in social media. So understanding their business models and how to engage with them inevitably will become very important. And I know that was one of the prerogatives of this network, was to try and encourage links with these guys and explore how you could work together. And yeah, I would echo that is very important. But as I was explaining to some people earlier, I didn't get anywhere with dialogue with any of those companies, possibly for reasons that were just more practical and administrative than they just didn't want to talk to me. But anyway, so recommendations, and again, this is still a work in progress, so these might change. As I've touched on a couple of times already, I think the government really, there is an obligation to take a more proactive role in shaping not just the use of social media and these kind of technologies and drawing insight from them, but in the whole role of the information age, without wanting to speak in too many cliches, just shaping where this goes. As we talked about earlier, there's a kind of head of steam building around the privacy issue and data, and it would make sense for the government to be taking a leading role in it. And Carl made this point earlier, and I think he was probably one of the first people I spoke to, sorry, the second bullet point, to make this point, but I heard it from many other people, that the researchers really need clarity, and you need it now, on where the ethical boundaries are, and particularly if that work is intended for government use. So I would say there's a clear argument for a government response to some of these points, and that is hopefully something we'll work on when we launch this report. And yeah, and as I put it, the final point, this is not a take it or leave it scenario for government. This issue isn't going away, and it needs to be tackled regardless of the extent to its involvement. Again, I think this was touched upon earlier, if you want to go down this road, I think a sort of design authority needs to start bringing together the right skills, and then the right skills need to decide how to develop a proper discipline that looks at social media research. And that's obviously going to involve quite a bit of private sector insight. And some people made the points that there is lots of talk in academia of multidisciplinary approaches to things, but a lot of the time it's people working in sort of together, but not really. That was a point that I've heard many times, that we really need to actually bring a very disparate group of academic disciplines together, and that's not going to be easy. Yes, and another really important point was that this type of developing these kind of capabilities can be done in a kind of sandpit or sort of wargaming simulation way, and that would seem to be a very sensible recommendation for government before it unleashes something quite this powerful. And the final thought was from this guy, James Harkin, who I came across the other day when I was reading a book review in the Financial Times. And I thought this was really interesting, because I've just been through a sort of 2-month process of going from being really skeptical about social media and then talking to lots of people extremely excited about it. And it's sort of inevitable not to get you get pulled in by the hype. So I thought this was a really valuable point that he made, just harvesting what people believe to be the case, and there are a whole load of questions about immediacy of reaction and so on that I haven't gone into, but I think we've got to remember where this insight lies and what value it has. Yes, it's a very exciting source of insight, but let's not forget where its limitations are. And that's me. That's it.